They let me pick. Did I ever tell you that? Choose whichever Spartan I wanted. You know me. I did my research, watched as you became the soldier we needed you to be. Like the others, you were strong and swift and brave. A natural leader. But you had something they didn't. Something no one saw but me. Can you guess? Luck.
I grew up in a fairly strange era of video games. It was just after the Nintendo 64, and the industry was in a transitionary phase. Things were changing so quickly in those early years, and it led to the formation of the key video game genres. And these genres eventually evolved into the pillars of AAA gaming that we know and sometimes love. AAA games dominated the Xbox 360 and the PS4, and they made strides PC gaming could only watch and gawk at. Of course, with Steam's revolutionary delivery, the PC gaming quickly caught up, and the race was on.
I want to talk about something that I've always found as part of my personal gaming experience.
That's Ben Hill, co-host of the Art for Artists podcast.
Through my years as a video game player, I've never really delved much into the AAA and big budget games. This isn't to say I've never played games like Call of Duty or Fallout or Assassin's Creed, because I have. I've certainly put a few hours into them, but I never really engaged very much with that side of the culture. It could be I just dislike these broad appeals, which is partially true. It could also be that I just tend not to spend much money on individual games, which is also true.
Ben's alluding to the idea of experimental consumption, rather than per-product selection. It's why games like World of Warcraft and EVE Online retain such strong core player bases.
I've always enjoyed games that are these discrete experiences. They tend to lack some of the polish of wealthier AAA games, but the freedom of targeting a specific market means that these smaller games can offer different and interesting takes on industry norms. They have more opportunity to experience and tinker with existing formulas because there's no broad demographic they need to hit.
This is one of the largest arguments for Sony targeting Hello Games and Xbox pushing for an indie marketplace on their platform. The big industry heads desperately want to be involved with this subculture. But the problem with this approach is that the larger publishing houses want to buff out any rough parts of these indie titles.
If we're talking about games that lack polish, I want to start with Dragon's Dogma. It's a fairly standard Japanese-developed Western RPG with an interesting online system and a fairly large world to explore. The game's most defining features are its rough edges. The game reminds me of a children's coloring book. Little pieces of chaos litter the world to the point where it's almost an aesthetic. There seems to be artifacts of creating something as systems heavy as Dragon's Dogma, and the developers clearly wanted their players to feel how ambitious the title wanted to be. It's the uneven pieces of the game that lend Dragon's Dogma its character.
Of course, not all games are as ambitious as Dragon's Dogma. Sometimes it's the developers who are ambitious with their level of trust.
In 2012, I shoutcasted this B-grade MOBA called Rise of Immortals. The game's UI and the surrounding information was vague enough to obscure the course gameplay systems. There basically wasn't a decided meta for a long time. The lack of polish left just enough visibility that players were driven to discover how to succeed, rather than following a set of rules dictated by the developers.
In some ways, Rise of Immortals is a great example of when a lack of polish can lead to a singular experience within a community. Without the developers trusting their players to decide their own meta, it would have just been another MOBA. Subversion of refinement, though, doesn't come without a cost. The most common result is a fairly steep learning curve due to a lack of intuitive design. Most players who love to play a given title may be deterred by the hurdles required to actually become competent, because sometimes it's just too hard to pick up the controls or remember which combos do what.
I tried to convince a friend of mine to play Super Smash Bros. Melee with me. We tooled around with it for a bit, but he eventually said that he just preferred playing the newer game. He didn't feel like he had as much control in Melee, despite the fidelity of the systems being higher than the newer games. Because the game wasn't as polished, he was unwilling to invest time in it.
The friction of entry to these rougher, less perfect games is a major drawback, but I always think of it as being sort of like a treasure map.
I think the more of them you play, the more indie games, the more you're likely to find these strange, damaged diamonds that you'll always remember.
Whether it's much smaller games or the Dragon's Dogma of the industry, there's a merit to seeing these unpolished games challenge the status quo. And one of my favourite indie games, The Darkest Dungeon, is the best turn-based game I've ever played, and coincidentally one of the hardest. And it gives the top players of the genre a real run for their money.
These indie studios are able to present more affordable experiences that, while rough and unfocused, can reveal rich experiences for those willing to break through the surface.
Whether it's revolutionary online survival games or an unexpected horror title, the indie market will keep producing these almost fractured games.
I kinda love unpolished games. I can't get enough of the moment when you suddenly realize that the title you're playing has done something that no one else has, or when a mechanic makes sense and the whole game just kind of falls into place like a puzzle. There's nothing quite like it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Travel safely. Good night.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. I had a blast putting it together. Let me know what you think of indie games and those games that aren't quite perfect. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Big thanks as always to Daniel Larson. He does the music for these. It's sensational. Everything he does I love. You can check his stuff out in the show notes down below. You can click that annotation to subscribe. It'll take you right to my channel, and you can get all of my videos right in your inbox. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.